The morning air was crisp as James Carter laced up his running shoes. It was 5:17 a.m., and the neighborhood was still wrapped in the quiet darkness that preceded dawn. James had moved to Oak Ridge Heights just 3 weeks ago, a peaceful suburban community that represented everything he had worked for. A safe place with good schools, manicured lawns, and neighbors who waved from their driveways. At 32, James had finally reached a milestone in his career. The promotion to senior software engineer at TechScare Solutions came with a substantial salary increase, enough to afford the down payment on this modest but beautiful home. His mother had cried when he gave her the virtual tour, proud of her son who had worked so hard since graduating from State University 8 years ago. James stretched his arms above his head, feeling the pleasant tension in his muscles. Running had always been his escape, his time to think and plan. These morning jogs through his new neighborhood had quickly become his favorite part of the day. Before heading out, he glanced at his grandfather's watch. The vintage Omega gleamed softly under the hallway light. It wasn't flashy by today's standards, but its sentimental value was priceless. His grandfather had received it as a retirement gift after 40 years at the steel mill, and he had given it to James when he graduated college, the first in their family to earn a degree. "Time is the most valuable thing you have, son," his grandfather had told him. "Use it wisely." James fastened the watch securely around his wrist, as he did every morning. The streets were empty as James set off at an easy pace. His breath formed small clouds in the cool air. The steady rhythm of his footfalls on the pavement was meditative, allowing his mind to wander to the upcoming project deadline and the team meeting scheduled for later that day. As he turned onto Maple Street, James noticed a police cruiser parked near the corner. This wasn't unusual. Police regularly patrolled the area, one of the reasons he had chosen this neighborhood. James nodded politely as he approached, the way he always acknowledged officers back in his hometown. What happened next occurred so quickly that James would later struggle to recall the exact sequence of events. The cruiser's door flung open. A uniformed officer emerged, his hand already resting on his holstered weapon. "Stop right there," the officer shouted, his voice slicing through the morning quiet. James slowed to a stop, confusion washing over him. He raised his hand slightly, a natural response to the officer's aggressive tone. "Sir, is something wrong?" James asked, his voice steady despite the sudden spike in his heart rate. Officer Michael Reynolds stepped closer, his eyes fixed on James with a suspicious glare. Reynolds had been on edge all night after receiving an alert about a luxury watch theft from Davidson Jewelers just after midnight. The suspect description was vague: male, athletic build, dark clothing, but the distinctive watch described in the report was supposedly worth over $15,000. "Where did you get that watch?" Reynolds demanded, pointing at James's wrist. James glanced down at his grandfather's timepiece, still confused but beginning to feel uneasy. It was my grandfather's. He gave it to me when I graduated." The officer's eyes narrowed. "Sure he did. Turn around and put your hands behind your back." James stood frozen, unable to comprehend what was happening. The beautiful morning that had started with such promise was about to turn into the worst day of his life. "I live just down the street," James said, his voice trembling slightly as he pointed toward his home. "I can show you the papers for the watch. It's been in my family for years." Officer Reynolds took another step forward. His face showed no hint of believing James. The morning light was just beginning to break over the trees, casting long shadows across the empty street. "I said turn around," Reynolds repeated, his hand still hovering near his weapon. "There was a robbery at Davidson Jewelers last night. A watch matching that description was stolen." James felt a cold wave of fear wash over him. He had seen news stories about encounters like this going wrong. Very wrong. His mouth went dry as he slowly turned around, his mind racing to make sense of the situation. "Sir, please check my ID. My name is James Carter. I just moved here. This watch was my grandfather's retirement gift." Reynolds ignored James's explanation and roughly grabbed his wrists, pulling them behind his back. The cold metal of handcuffs clicked shut around James's wrists, biting into his skin. "You can explain all that at the station," Reynolds said, his tone dismissive. From across the street, early rising neighbor Mrs. Wilson stepped onto her porch, drawn by the commotion. She squinted in the dim light, trying to make sense of what was happening. "Officer, is everything okay?" she called out, clutching her robe tightly around herself. Reynolds glanced up. Police business, ma'am. Please go back inside. James saw an opportunity. Mrs. Wilson, it's me, James Carter. I moved in at 1542 Oakview Drive. Please call my sister Emily. Mrs. Wilson's eyes widened with recognition. James, the new neighbor? What's happening? Reynolds tightened his grip on James's arm. Ma'am, I need you to go back inside now. He's mistaken, James pleaded. This watch was my grandfather's. There's a mistake. Another police car turned onto the street, its headlights cutting through the morning shadows. Officer Diane Chen stepped out, approaching the scene with a cautious expression. Reynolds, what's the situation? She asked, glancing between her colleague and James. Got our jewelry thief, Reynolds stated confidently. Matches the description, has the watch. Chen looked at James more carefully. ID. Back pocket, James said quickly. Left side, please check. Chen carefully removed James's wallet and flipped it open to his driver's license. She studied it, then looked at the address. Reynolds, he does live on Oakview, just a few blocks from here. A flicker of doubt crossed Reynolds' face, but he quickly dismissed it. That doesn't explain the watch. The report specifically mentioned an Omega. Look at his wrist. Chen examined the watch on James' wrist. Sir, do you have proof of ownership for this timepiece? Yes, James said, relief flooding through him at finally being asked a reasonable question. In my home office, I have the original papers, photos of my grandfather wearing it, everything. Mrs. Wilson had stepped off her porch and was now standing at the edge of her yard. Officer, I've seen him jogging every morning since he moved in, always wearing that watch. Reynolds frowned, clearly displeased with the direction things were taking. The jewelry store owner described this exact model. It can't be a coincidence. Chen sighed. Let's verify before we take him in. If he has proof at his house, we should check. Reynolds reluctantly loosened his grip but kept the handcuffs on. Fine, but if he's lying. James felt a small spark of hope as they walked toward his home. The sun was now rising properly, illuminating the neat row of houses on his street. Neighbors were beginning to peek through curtains, curious about the police presence. What should have been a peaceful morning run had turned into a nightmare, and James couldn't shake the feeling that even with proof, Officer Reynolds had already decided he was guilty. The walk to James's house felt longer than the 3 blocks it actually was. With his hands still cuffed behind his back, James could feel the stares of neighbors peering through windows and slowing their cars as they drove past. His cheeks burned with humiliation. It's the blue house with white trim, James said, nodding toward his modest home at the end of the street. The morning glory vines he had planted along the fence were just beginning to bloom, small purple flowers opening to greet the rising sun. Officer Chen walked slightly ahead while Officer Reynolds kept a firm grip on James's arm, as if expecting him to bolt at any moment. Mrs. Wilson had insisted on following them, keeping a respectful distance but making it clear she wasn't abandoning her new neighbor. Keys? Chen asked as they reached the front door. Front pocket, James replied, trying to maintain his dignity despite the circumstances. Chen reached into his pocket and retrieved a keyring with a small university logo attached. She unlocked the door and stepped inside, holding it open for Reynolds and James. The living room was neat but showed signs of someone who had recently moved in. A few unpacked boxes remained stacked in one corner. Family photos sat on the mantel, including one of an elderly man with a kind smile, James's grandfather. The papers for the watch are in my office. Second door on the right, James explained. Reynolds's grip tightened. I'll go with him. The small home office was organized meticulously. Bookshelves lined one wall, while a desk with a computer setup occupied another. James nodded toward the filing cabinet in the corner. Bottom drawer. There's a folder labeled Family Documents. Reynolds opened the drawer and rifled through the neatly arranged folders until he found the one James had mentioned. Inside were birth certificates, insurance papers, and a smaller envelope labeled Grandpa's Watch. Officer Chen, who had followed them into the room, took the envelope and carefully opened it. Inside was a certificate of authenticity for an Omega watch purchased in 1982, along with several photographs of an elderly man, clearly the same man from the living room photo, wearing the watch at various family gatherings. There's also a letter, James said quietly, from my grandfather when he gave it to me. Chen unfolded a handwritten letter, yellowed with age. The handwriting was shaky but legible. To my grandson James on his graduation day. May this remind you that every second is precious. For the first time, doubt flickered across Reynolds's face. Chen looked at her colleague with a pointed expression. I think we need to verify the details of the stolen watch, she said firmly. The report might not be as specific as you remembered. Reynolds's jaw tightened, but he nodded curtly. He reached for his radio and stepped out of the room to make the call. James exhaled slowly. Can you please remove these cuffs now? Chen hesitated but then nodded, taking out her keys. Turn around, please. The relief of having his hands free was immediate. James rubbed his wrists where the metal had dug into his skin, leaving angry red marks. From the hallway, they could hear Reynolds' conversation. Dispatch, this is Officer Reynolds. I need the exact description of the stolen watch from the Davidson Jewelers case. Yes, I'll hold. Mrs. Wilson had made herself comfortable in James's living room, arms crossed defiantly. When James emerged from the office, she gave him a sympathetic smile. Your plants need watering, she said, as if trying to inject normalcy into the absurd situation. James managed a weak smile. Thanks for noticing. And thank you for being here. Reynolds returned, his expression unreadable. The stolen watch was a new Rolex, not an Omega. Similar color, the kitchen clock ticked loudly in the awkward silence that filled James's living room. Officer Chen handed James a glass of water, which he accepted with still trembling hands. The red marks on his wrists were darkening, evidence of how tightly the handcuffs had been secured. I'll need to file a report about this incident, Chen said, her voice professional but gentle. She glanced at Reynolds, who stood near the door, his posture stiff and uncomfortable. Both of us will need to document what happened this morning. James took a slow sip of water. And what exactly will that report say, Officer Chen? Before she could answer, Reynolds cleared his throat. It will state that we responded to a potential suspect sighting related to the Davidson Jewelers theft. Upon investigation, we determined you were not involved. His words were clipped, offering the bare minimum of explanation without a hint of apology. Mrs. Wilson, who had refused to leave despite Reynolds' not-so-subtle hints, spoke up from her seat on James's couch. Will it mention that you handcuffed an innocent man on his morning jog without proper cause, or that you refused to check his ID first? Reynolds' face hardened. Ma'am, I was responding to a reported crime. Stop, James said, his voice quiet but firm. He set the glass down on the coffee table and stood up. I need your badge numbers. Both of you. Chen immediately reached for her notepad and wrote down both their names and badge numbers, handing the paper to James without hesitation. Reynolds watched with narrowed eyes. I hope you understand, Mr. Carter, that we were simply doing our job, Reynolds said. The safety of this community. I am part of this community, James interrupted. I moved here because I thought it was safe. I never imagined that jogging while wearing my grandfather's watch would make me a suspect. The unspoken implication hung in the air. Everyone in the room knew that James's race had played a factor in Reynolds' quick judgment. Chen stepped forward. Mr. Carter, would you like to file a formal complaint? It's your right. Reynolds shot her a look of betrayal, but Chen held her ground. James considered the question. Filing a complaint meant extended involvement with the police department, forms to fill out, possibly even testifying. It meant reliving this humiliation again and again. But staying silent meant Reynolds would face no consequences. Yes, he finally said, I want to file a complaint, and I'll be calling my attorney as soon as you leave. The morning sun now streamed fully through the windows, illuminating dust particles floating in the air. What should have been a productive workday was already derailed. James would need to call his office, explain why he wouldn't be in. The thought of sharing this story with his colleagues made his stomach twist. We'll be on our way then, Chen said, handing James another card with information about the complaint process. Again, I'm sorry about what happened today. As the officers prepared to leave, James's phone rang. He checked the screen. Emily, his sister. Mrs. Wilson must have called her after all. I need to take this, he said, stepping into the kitchen for privacy. James? What's happening? Mrs. Wilson left me a crazy message about police and handcuffs. Emily's voice was tight with worry. Through the doorway, James could see Reynolds and Chen letting themselves out. Mrs. Wilson remained seated, clearly planning to stay and make sure James was truly all right. I'm okay, but something bad happened this morning. His voice caught unexpectedly. Now that the immediate danger had passed, the full weight of the morning's events crashed down on him. Can you come over? I might need a ride to the police station later to file a complaint. As he spoke to his sister, James caught a glimpse of himself in the reflection of the kitchen window. The man looking back seemed different somehow, more cautious, less trusting. His grandfather's watch still encircled his wrist, but now it carried a new weight beyond its metal and gears. This morning had changed something fundamental in James's relationship with his new neighborhood, and he wasn't sure if it could ever be repaired. Emily arrived at James's house 40 minutes later, her normally styled hair hastily pulled back in a ponytail and concern etched across her face. She worked as a paralegal at Henderson and Wright, one of the city's most respected law firms, and had already made 3 calls to attorneys she trusted before arriving. I brought bagels, she said, setting a paper bag on the kitchen counter. Her attempt at normalcy fell flat as she saw the marks on her brother's wrists. Oh, James. Mrs. Wilson had finally returned to her own home, but not before making James promise to call if he needed anything. Her final words to him, "This isn't right, and it isn't over," echoed in his mind. James sat at his kitchen table, staring at the complaint form Officer Chen had provided. The formal language seemed inadequate to capture what had happened, the fear, the humiliation, the injustice of it all. "Marcus Henderson said he can see you at noon," Emily said, referring to one of the senior partners at her firm. He specializes in civil rights cases. James nodded, grateful for his sister's efficiency. "I'm still trying to process all this, Em. 1 minute I'm on my morning run, the next I'm being treated like a criminal." Emily placed her hand over his. "Have you checked your phone?" Mrs. Wilson said there were other neighbors watching. James hadn't thought to check social media. He picked up his phone and opened the neighborhood community app. His stomach dropped. Already there were 3 different posts about the incident, including a blurry photo someone had taken from their window showing James in handcuffs. The comments section was a battleground. "I saw the whole thing. That officer was way out of line. Police were just doing their job. There was a robbery." Would this have happened if he was white? Doubt it. New to the neighborhood and already causing trouble? Emily read over his shoulder, her expression darkening. "Save all of these. Screenshot everything." James's phone buzzed with an incoming call from a number he didn't recognize. He answered cautiously. "Mr. Carter? This is Captain Rivera from the Oak Ridge Heights Police Department. I've been made aware of an incident this morning involving my officers." James put the call on speaker so Emily could hear. "Yes, Captain. I was just about to come in to file a formal complaint." There was a brief pause. "I'd like to meet with you personally about this matter. Officer Chen has already submitted her report, and I'm very concerned about what I'm hearing." Emily scribbled a note and slid it across the table. "Illegal firest." James nodded. "I appreciate that, Captain. I've arranged to meet with my attorney at noon. Perhaps we could come by the station afterward." Another pause. "Of course, that's your right. I want to assure you, Mr. Carter, that what happened this morning isn't representative of how we aim to serve our community." After arranging a 2:00 p.m. meeting at the station, James ended the call and looked at Emily. "This is becoming bigger than I expected." "Good," Emily said firmly. "It should be big. What happened to you was wrong." James ran his finger over his grandfather's watch, the object that had somehow triggered this entire ordeal. He remembered his grandfather's stories about growing up in the South during the civil rights movement. "Time changes things," his grandfather had often told him, "but only if good people stand up when it matters." By the time they left to meet with the attorney, James's inbox contained 6 messages from reporters who had somehow gotten his contact information. The neighborhood app had exploded with comments, and his phone showed missed calls from his boss and 3 coworkers. A simple morning jog had snowballed into something that now seemed poised to consume his life. As Emily drove them downtown, James watched the perfect suburban houses of Oak Ridge Heights pass by outside the window, wondering if any of them would ever truly feel like home now. The law offices of Henderson and Wright occupied the 11th floor of a glass tower in the city center. James sat stiffly in a leather chair across from Marcus Henderson, a man whose calm demeanor and measured voice had made him legendary in courtrooms across the state. "So they detained you without asking for identification first," Henderson said, making notes on a yellow legal pad. He was in his 60s, with salt and pepper hair and reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. "And this was based solely on the fact that you were jogging in the neighborhood while wearing a watch?" "Yes," James confirmed. "Officer Reynolds claimed it matched the description of a stolen watch, but we later learned it wasn't even the same brand." Henderson removed his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose. "In my 30 years practicing law, I wish I could say this story surprises me." He looked directly at James. "How public do you want this to be?" Emily, sitting beside her brother, leaned forward. "What are our options?" "Several," Henderson replied. "We can file the complaint internally and let the department handle it. We can pursue a civil case against the department and Officer Reynolds specifically. Or," he paused, "we can contact my friends at the State Justice Initiative. They've been documenting similar cases across the county. Your experience could become part of a pattern and practice investigation." James considered the possibilities. Part of him wanted to retreat, to try and reclaim the privacy and peace he'd sought in moving to Oak Ridge Heights. Another part remembered the humiliation of standing handcuffed in front of his new neighbors. "What would my grandfather do?" he muttered, almost to himself. "I'm sorry?" Henderson asked. James touched his watch. "My grandfather faced much worse than this. He wouldn't stay quiet." Before Henderson could respond, James's phone buzzed. It was a text from Mrs. Wilson with a link to the local news website. The headline made his heart sink. "Local resident claims racial profiling in Oak Ridge Heights police stop." Emily read the article over his shoulder. It quoted social media posts. "Someone named Kevin Drake is defending Officer Reynolds, saying you fit the description of someone suspicious in the area." "Kevin Drake," Henderson murmured, typing the name into his computer. "Ah, interesting. Former police officer, now runs a security company that has contracts with the city, and he's Officer Reynolds' brother-in-law." The pieces were falling into place. James felt a strange calm settle over him as the path forward became clear. "I want to pursue all options," he said firmly. "The internal complaint, the civil case, and I want to speak with the State Justice Initiative. This isn't just about me anymore." Anderson nodded approvingly. "I was hoping you'd say that. Now, before your meeting with Captain Rivera, let's prepare your statement." For the next hour, James carefully recounted every detail of the morning's events while Henderson took meticulous notes. When they were finished, the attorney handed James a business card with a handwritten note on the back. "This is my personal cell number. Call me day or night if anything else happens. And James," Henderson's voice softened, "prepare yourself. This might get worse before it gets better." As they drove to the police station, Emily pointed out a small group of protesters gathering near the entrance with hastily made signs. "Justice for James," and "Oak Ridge Heights PD, Protect Don't Profile." How did this happen so fast? James wondered aloud. "Social media," Emily replied. "For better or worse, your experience has struck a nerve." Captain Rivera was waiting for them in the lobby, her expression grave. She was a short woman with an air of authority that made her seem taller. "Mr. Carter," she said, extending her hand, "I wish we were meeting under different circumstances. I've reviewed the body cam footage from this morning's incident, and I believe we have much to discuss." James shook her hand, noticing the protesters through the glass doors behind her. What had begun as a personal indignity was rapidly becoming something much larger. A test case, a rallying point, a potential catalyst for change. As they followed Captain Rivera to her office, James felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders alongside the comforting presence of his grandfather's watch. Captain Rivera's office was smaller than James had expected. A desk cluttered with files and family photos dominated the space. She gestured for James and Emily to take the 2 chairs opposite her desk while Henderson remained standing near the door. "I've reviewed the body cam footage multiple times," Captain Rivera began, her tone professional but concerned. "I want to be clear that what happened this morning falls short of our department's standards." She turned her computer monitor so they could all see it. "Would you like to view the footage before we continue?" James nodded, though his stomach tightened at the thought of watching himself being humiliated again. Emily reached over and squeezed his hand as Captain Rivera pressed play. The video showed exactly what James remembered, but seeing it from Officer Reynolds' perspective made it somehow worse. The aggressive approach, the immediate accusation, the dismissal of James's explanations. It was all there in high definition. What struck James most was his own face, the fear and confusion clearly visible as Reynolds grabbed his wrists. "I've suspended Officer Reynolds pending a full investigation," Captain Rivera said when the video ended. The silence in the room was heavy. "I also want you to know that Officer Chen has provided a detailed statement that corroborates your account." "Suspension with pay, I assume?" Henderson asked, his voice neutral. Captain Rivera nodded. "That's standard procedure during an investigation." "And how long will this investigation take?" James asked. "Typically 30 to 60 days, she replied. "But given the circumstances and the public interest, we're expediting the process." The captain slid a folder across her desk. "This contains the official apology from the department, acknowledgement of the inappropriate conduct, and information about the investigation process." Henderson stepped forward to review the documents. After a moment, he looked up with a frown. "This makes no mention of racial profiling." "Because we haven't determined that was a factor," Captain Rivera replied carefully. James felt a flash of anger. Would Officer Reynolds have stopped a white jogger wearing an expensive watch? The captain didn't answer immediately. "I understand your perspective, Mr. Carter, but I can't make that determination without a full investigation." Outside, the voices of the protesters grew louder. Someone had brought a megaphone. "There's something else you should know," Captain Rivera continued. "We've received 2 other complaints about Officer Reynolds in the past year involving similar circumstances. Questionable stops of minority residents. Those complaints didn't proceed because the individuals chose not to pursue them." Henderson's eyebrows shot up. "And this information wasn't shared with the public or the Oversight Committee." "The complaints were classified as unfounded after initial review," she admitted. "In light of today's incident, I'm reopening those cases." James leaned forward. "Those people who filed complaints, can I speak with them?" "That would be their choice," Captain Rivera said. "If they consent, I can provide contact information." As they continued discussing next steps, James's phone vibrated with an incoming call. His boss. "I need to take this," he said, stepping into the hallway. "James, are you okay?" "Everyone here is talking about what happened," his boss said, genuine concern in his voice. "I'm at the police station now," James explained. "It's been a difficult day." "Take whatever time you need. And James, the company has your back. HR is preparing a statement condemning the treatment you received." When James returned to the captain's office, the meeting was wrapping up. Henderson had a satisfied look on his face. "Captain Rivera has agreed to expedite access to all relevant records," he explained. "And she's recommended an independent review of the department's stop procedures." As they prepared to leave, Captain Rivera addressed James directly. "Mr. Carter, what happened to you shouldn't happen to anyone in our community. I can't undo it, but I promise you this, it will lead to change." Outside, the group of protesters had grown. News vans lined the street. James spotted Mrs. Wilson among the crowd, holding a sign that read "Neighbors Stand Together." What had begun as a personal injustice was becoming a movement. As cameras turned toward him, James straightened his shoulders and prepared to speak his truth. 6 months had passed since that fateful morning jog. James stood at the podium in Oak Ridge Heights Community Center, looking out at the faces that had become familiar during his unexpected journey. The room was packed with residents, police officers, city officials, and media representatives. "Today marks a new beginning," James said, his voice steady. "What happened to me could have ended with anger and division. Instead, we chose a different path." Behind him sat Captain Rivera, now promoted to deputy chief, alongside Chief Barnes and Mayor Wilson. Officer Chen was there too, having become an unexpected ally in the push for reform. Notably absent was Officer Reynolds, who had resigned from the force 3 months earlier after the investigation revealed a pattern of biased conduct. In the front row, Emily beamed with pride. Beside her sat Mrs. Wilson, who had organized neighborhood support groups and never missed a single hearing or meeting. Marcus Henderson nodded encouragingly from his seat among the city council members. The Oak Ridge Heights Community Policing Initiative we're launching today isn't just about preventing incidents like mine, James continued. It's about building a community where everyone feels safe, respected, and heard. The journey to this moment had not been easy. James's case had indeed become part of the State Justice Initiative's investigation, which identified similar patterns in departments across the county. The civil lawsuit against the police department had been settled with significant policy changes rather than just monetary compensation, at James's insistence. I wear my grandfather's watch every day, James said, holding up his wrist. He taught me that timepieces don't just show us where we are in the day, they remind us that change takes time, but it does come if we work for it. The program James had helped design included new training protocols, community oversight committees, and transparent reporting of all police stops. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. After the ceremony, as people mingled over refreshments, Deputy Chief Rivera approached James. The first class of officers completed the new training program yesterday, she told him. Their feedback was positive. They particularly appreciated your input in the curriculum. James nodded. And the body camera compliance? 100%, she confirmed. The footage is being reviewed regularly by the Civilian Committee. Good, James said simply. His phone buzzed with a text from his real estate agent. The offer on his house had been accepted. Despite everything, James had decided to stay in Oak Ridge Heights. Moving away would have felt like giving up on the change he'd helped start. As the crowd thinned, James found himself standing with Mrs. Wilson near the community center entrance. Your grandfather would be proud, she said, patting his arm. You turned something terrible into something meaningful. I hope so, James replied. Sometimes I still get nervous when I see a patrol car while I'm running. Healing takes time, she said wisely. But look around you. This neighborhood is different now because you stood up. It was true. The incident had forced uncomfortable conversations throughout the community. It had revealed both the worst and the best in people. Some neighbors James had never met before had become his strongest advocates. Others had shown their true colors with their silence or criticism. As James walked home that evening, he took his usual route through the neighborhood. The same streets that had once been the scene of his humiliation now felt reclaimed. Children played in front yards. Neighbors waved from porches. A patrol car passed by slowly, and the officer inside, one of the newly trained recruits, nodded respectfully. James checked his grandfather's watch. It was almost sunset. Tomorrow he would wake up at 5 a.m. and go for his morning run, as he always did. But now, when he jogged through Oak Ridge Heights, he carried not just memories of that terrible morning, but also the knowledge that sometimes justice moves slowly, but with enough persistence and courage, it does move forward. The watch on his wrist kept perfect time, just as it had for decades. And James, like his grandfather before him, had learned that change was possible, even if it came 1 second at a time.